Question 1. Cost-benefit analysis shows that investing in identifying transferable skills for injured workers can reduce claim duration and improve employee retention, but the practical application requires careful consideration. When an employee sustains a work-related injury that prevents them from performing their usual duties, what is the most effective approach to identifying potential alternative roles or modified duties within the organization that leverages their existing capabilities? Option A. Prioritize filling immediate operational gaps by assigning the worker to any available task that seems manageable, without a formal assessment of transferable skills or the worker's long-term rehabilitation potential. Option B. Assume that any skill not directly related to the injured body part is automatically transferable and assign the worker to any available task, regardless of its suitability or long-term viability. Option C. Focus solely on the worker's pre-injury job description and the specific physical limitations preventing them from performing those duties, concluding that no alternative roles are available if the original job cannot be modified. Option D. Conduct a detailed assessment of the worker's pre-injury responsibilities and identify transferable skills such as communication, problem-solving, and organizational abilities that can be applied to different tasks or roles. Then explore opportunities for modified duties or alternative positions that align with these skills and the worker's current physical limitations. Correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed assessment of the worker's pre-injury responsibilities and identify transferable skills such as communication, problem-solving, and organizational abilities that can be applied to different tasks or roles. Then explore opportunities for modified duties or alternative positions that align with these skills and the worker's current physical limitations. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of how an injured worker's existing skills can be leveraged for a successful return to work, balancing the employer's operational needs with the worker's recovery and rehabilitation. The core difficulty lies in accurately identifying and articulating transferable skills in a way that is both realistic for the worker and beneficial for the employer, all within the framework of workers' compensation regulations. This requires careful assessment beyond the worker's immediate job description. The correct approach involves a comprehensive evaluation of the injured worker's pre-injury roles, responsibilities, and demonstrated abilities, looking for skills that are not tied to the specific physical demands of their previous job, but can be applied to different tasks or roles. This includes soft skills like communication, problem-solving, organization, and leadership, as well as technical skills that might have broader applications. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with the principles of workers' compensation, which aim to facilitate a safe and timely return to work. Regulatory frameworks often encourage or mandate employers to explore modified duties and suitable employment options, and identifying transferable skills is fundamental to this process. By focusing on these skills, the employer can identify potential alternative roles within the organization that accommodate the worker's limitations while still utilizing their capabilities, thereby promoting their economic independence and reducing the duration of disability. An incorrect approach would be to solely focus on the worker's pre-injury job title and the physical limitations preventing them from performing it, without exploring other potential roles or tasks. This fails to acknowledge the breadth of an individual's capabilities and can lead to unnecessary, prolonged absence from work or a failure to identify suitable alternative employment. This approach is ethically problematic as it may not actively seek solutions for the worker's rehabilitation and return to work. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that any skill not directly related to the injured body part is automatically transferable without a proper assessment of its applicability to available roles or modified duties. This can lead to unrealistic expectations for both the employer and the employee, potentially resulting in a mismatch of skills and duties, which could be detrimental to the worker's recovery and morale, and may not meet the employer's operational needs. This approach lacks the diligence required to ensure a sustainable return to work. A third incorrect approach would be to prioritize the employer's immediate operational convenience over the worker's rehabilitation and the identification of genuinely suitable alternative roles. This could involve assigning tasks that are not truly within the worker's capacity or are temporary, make-work assignments that do not represent a sustainable return to employment. This approach risks violating the spirit and potentially the letter of workers' compensation laws, which are designed to support the worker's recovery and reintegration into the workforce. The professional decision-making process should involve a collaborative effort between the employer, the injured worker, and potentially rehabilitation professionals. It requires active listening to the worker's description of their abilities, a thorough understanding of the employer's operational needs and available roles, and a creative yet practical approach to matching skills with opportunities. The focus should always be on facilitating a safe, sustainable, and meaningful return to work, guided by regulatory requirements and ethical considerations. Question 2. Research into the most effective and compliant methods for gathering witness statements in a workers' compensation claim investigation, which approach best ensures the integrity and admissibility of the evidence while adhering to regulatory requirements for impartiality and thoroughness. Option A. Relying primarily on the injured worker's initial incident report and supplementing it with any readily available documentation, such as medical records, without actively seeking additional witness accounts. Option B. Requesting written statements from all potential witnesses via email, allowing them to respond at their convenience without direct interaction or follow-up questioning. Option C. Interviewing all relevant parties, including the injured worker, supervisors, and any eyewitnesses, using a structured questioning technique, documenting each interview thoroughly and seeking to corroborate statements where possible. Option D. Conducting informal conversations with co-workers and supervisors to gather general information about the injured worker's typical work habits and the general work environment. The correct answer is D. Conducting informal conversations with co-workers and supervisors to gather general information about the injured worker's typical work habits and the general work environment. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims adjuster to balance the need for thorough evidence gathering with the ethical and regulatory obligations to treat all parties fairly and to maintain the integrity of the investigation. The adjuster must navigate potential biases, ensure all relevant information is collected without coercion, and document the process meticulously to support a fair and accurate determination of the worker's compensation claim. The core challenge lies in obtaining reliable witness statements that are admissible and persuasive in the context of a worker's compensation claim, adhering strictly to the procedural rules and evidentiary standards governing such claims. The correct approach involves systematically interviewing all relevant witnesses, including the injured worker, co-workers, supervisors, and any potential third parties, using open-ended questions to elicit detailed accounts. This approach prioritizes obtaining first-hand contemporaneous accounts, documenting the interview process, date, time, location, attendees, method of recording, and seeking corroboration where possible. This aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on a comprehensive and impartial investigation to establish the facts of the injury and its relation to employment. Ethical considerations demand that statements are obtained voluntarily and without undue influence, ensuring the accuracy and reliability of the evidence. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the injured worker's initial report without seeking corroborating statements from other witnesses. This fails to provide a balanced perspective and may overlook crucial details or alternative explanations, potentially leading to an inaccurate claim determination. Another incorrect approach is to interview witnesses individually but fail to document the interview process or the content of their statements systematically. This lack of documentation compromises the integrity of the evidence and its admissibility, as it cannot be verified or cross-referenced. Furthermore, pressuring witnesses to provide statements that align with a preconceived notion of the claim's outcome is a significant ethical and regulatory violation, undermining the impartiality of the investigation and potentially leading to fraudulent claims or denials. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with identifying all potential sources of relevant information. This is followed by developing a plan for evidence gathering, prioritizing witness interviews based on their proximity to the incident and their potential knowledge. During interviews, professionals must maintain neutrality, ask clear and unbiased questions, and meticulously document all interactions and statements. Finally, all gathered evidence should be reviewed objectively to form a comprehensive understanding of the incident, ensuring compliance with all applicable workers' compensation laws and regulations. Question 3. To address the challenge of accurately underwriting workers' compensation policies for businesses operating in high-risk industries, what is the most appropriate approach for an underwriter to take regarding the assessment of potential hazards and the determination of appropriate premium levels. Option A. Rely primarily on the employer's submitted application and self-reported safety procedures, assuming the information provided is accurate and complete. Option B. Apply a standardized, one-size-fits-all risk assessment model to all businesses, regardless of their industry or operational specifics. Option C. Conduct thorough site inspections, review the employer's safety programs and incident history, and consult industry-specific loss control resources to inform risk classification and premium calculation. Option D. Focus solely on the historical claims data of the business, without considering current operational safety measures or industry-wide risk factors. The correct answer is C. Conduct thorough site inspections, review the employer's safety programs and incident history, and consult industry-specific loss control resources to inform risk classification and premium calculation. Explanation. The scenario presents a professional challenge for an underwriter tasked with assessing the risks associated with insuring a business operating in a high-risk industry, such as logging or construction. The core difficulty lies in accurately quantifying and pricing the inherent dangers, potential for severe injuries, and the likelihood of significant claims. This requires a deep understanding of industry-specific hazards, regulatory compliance, and the financial implications of potential losses, all within the framework of workers' compensation laws. Careful judgment is paramount to ensure the insurer remains solvent while providing adequate coverage to the employer. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that goes beyond standard underwriting questionnaires. This includes conducting thorough site inspections to observe safety protocols in practice, reviewing the employer's safety training programs and incident history, and analyzing the specific tasks performed by employees. The underwriter must also consult industry-specific loss control resources and adhere to the underwriting guidelines and rating manuals established by the relevant workers' compensation regulatory body. This detailed examination allows for a more accurate determination of the risk profile, appropriate premium calculation, and the identification of necessary risk management strategies. This aligns with the ethical and regulatory obligation to underwrite risks responsibly and to ensure that premiums reflect the actual exposure, thereby protecting both the insurer and the insured. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the employer's self-reported information without independent verification. This fails to acknowledge the potential for bias in self-reporting and overlooks critical on-site hazards that may not be apparent from documentation alone. Such an approach risks underpricing the risk, leading to financial losses for the insurer and potentially inadequate coverage for the employee if a claim arises. This violates the principle of accurate risk assessment mandated by regulatory frameworks. Another incorrect approach is to apply a generic risk assessment methodology without tailoring it to the specific high-risk industry. Workers' compensation regulations often require industry-specific considerations due to varying hazard levels and claim frequencies. Failing to account for these nuances can lead to misclassification of risk and inappropriate premium setting, which is a direct contravention of regulatory requirements for fair and accurate underwriting. A further incorrect approach is to dismiss the need for ongoing monitoring of safety practices once a policy is issued. High-risk industries are dynamic, and safety conditions can change. A failure to implement or recommend post-underwriting risk management strategies and periodic reviews means the insurer is not fulfilling its duty to manage the risk throughout the policy term, potentially exposing both parties to unforeseen liabilities and violating the spirit of workers' compensation as a system designed for safety and financial protection. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes due diligence and regulatory compliance. This involves a multifaceted approach to risk assessment, incorporating both documented evidence and direct observation. It requires staying abreast of industry-specific best practices and regulatory updates, and understanding that underwriting is an ongoing process, not a one-time event. When dealing with high-risk industries, a conservative yet informed approach, grounded in thorough investigation and adherence to established guidelines, is essential for sound professional practice. Question 4. Analysis of a situation where a company engages an individual who performs services for them, is paid on a per-project basis, and states they are an independent contractor. The individual sustains an injury while performing these services. What is the legally mandated initial course of action for the company regarding workers' compensation reporting and coverage? Option A. Advise the individual that as an independent contractor, they are not covered by workers' compensation and instruct them to seek their own medical care and insurance. Option B. Delay reporting the injury until a definitive determination is made regarding the individual's classification as an employee or independent contractor, to avoid unnecessary reporting if they are indeed an independent contractor. Option C. Immediately report the injury to the workers' compensation insurer and the state workers' compensation board, initiating an investigation into the individual's employment status to determine if they meet the legal definition of an employee. Option D. Classify the individual as an independent contractor based on their self-declaration and the per-project payment structure, and therefore, no workers' compensation reporting or coverage is required. The correct answer is C. Immediately report the injury to the workers' compensation insurer and the state workers' compensation board, initiating an investigation into the individual's employment status to determine if they meet the legal definition of an employee. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the legal and regulatory framework governing workers' compensation claims, specifically concerning the definition of an employee and the employer's responsibility to report injuries. Misinterpreting these definitions can lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for the employer, including penalties for late reporting and potential liability for benefits the injured individual is entitled to. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between an independent contractor and an employee, as this distinction dictates whether workers' compensation coverage is mandatory. The correct approach involves a thorough review of the claimant's working relationship with the company, applying the established legal tests for employee status under the relevant workers' compensation statutes. This includes examining factors such as the degree of control the company exercises over the worker, the method of payment, the provision of tools and equipment, and the permanency of the relationship. If the claimant meets the criteria for an employee, the employer must then immediately report the injury to the workers' compensation insurer and the state agency as required by law. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the statutory definitions and reporting obligations, ensuring compliance and protecting the rights of potentially injured workers. An incorrect approach would be to immediately classify the individual as an independent contractor solely based on the worker's self-identification or the company's preference. This fails to acknowledge that the legal definition of an employee is determined by the nature of the work relationship, not by the labels assigned by the parties. This approach risks misclassifying an employee as an independent contractor, thereby avoiding mandatory workers' compensation coverage and reporting obligations, which is a direct violation of the law and can result in penalties and back payments. Another incorrect approach would be to delay reporting the injury while investigating the worker's status. While an investigation is necessary, the legal framework typically mandates a prompt reporting of any injury that could be work-related, regardless of the final determination of employee status. Delaying reporting beyond the statutory timeframe, even if the worker is later found to be an employee, constitutes a failure to comply with reporting requirements and can prejudice the claim and incur penalties. A third incorrect approach would be to assume that because the worker provided their own tools, they are automatically an independent contractor. While the provision of tools is a factor in determining status, it is not determinative. The overall control and nature of the relationship are paramount. Relying on a single factor without considering the totality of the circumstances is a flawed legal interpretation. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a clear understanding of the applicable workers' compensation statutes and their definitions of employee and employer. When an injury occurs, the immediate priority is to gather information about the working relationship. If there is any ambiguity regarding employee status, it is prudent to err on the side of caution and treat the individual as an employee for reporting purposes, while simultaneously conducting a thorough investigation into their status. Prompt reporting of the injury, as mandated by law, is crucial to avoid penalties and ensure that any eligible worker receives timely benefits. Legal counsel or a qualified workers' compensation professional should be consulted if there is significant doubt about the worker's classification. Question 5. The investigation demonstrates that a worker sustained a back injury resulting in chronic pain and limited mobility. The treating physician has provided an impairment rating based on subjective pain reports and observed functional limitations. The claims adjuster must determine the worker's eligibility for permanent disability benefits, which approach best aligns with the regulatory framework for workers' compensation technical certification regarding impairment ratings and disability evaluations. Option A. Focus primarily on the worker's inability to perform their pre-injury job duties, assigning a disability rating based on vocational factors without a thorough medical impairment assessment. Option B. Accept the treating physician's impairment rating at face value, as they are the primary medical provider, and proceed directly to determining disability benefits based on this rating. Option C. Independently review all medical reports, including specialist opinions and diagnostic imaging, and apply the jurisdiction's adopted impairment rating guidelines to objectively assess the worker's functional loss, then evaluate this impairment against the statutory definition of disability. Option D. Request a new independent medical examination solely to obtain a rating that supports a lower level of disability, regardless of the existing medical evidence. The correct answer is C. Independently review all medical reports, including specialist opinions and diagnostic imaging, and apply the jurisdiction's adopted impairment rating guidelines to objectively assess the worker's functional loss, then evaluate this impairment against the statutory definition of disability. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims adjuster to navigate the complexities of impairment ratings and disability evaluations within the specific regulatory framework of workers' compensation. The adjuster must not only understand the medical aspects of an injury, but also how those medical findings translate into a legal determination of disability under the applicable statutes and guidelines. The core challenge lies in ensuring that the impairment rating accurately reflects the worker's functional limitations, and that the subsequent disability evaluation aligns with legal definitions and evidentiary standards, avoiding both under- and overcompensation. The correct approach involves a thorough review of all available medical evidence, including the treating physician's opinions, independent medical examinations, and any specialist reports. This review must be conducted in conjunction with the specific impairment rating guidelines mandated by the relevant workers' compensation jurisdiction, e.g., AMA Guides to the Evaluation of Permanent Impairment, as adopted by the jurisdiction. The adjuster must then apply the legal definitions of disability as defined by the jurisdiction statutes and case law to the determined impairment. This ensures that the disability evaluation is grounded in both objective medical findings and the specific legal requirements for compensation, thereby upholding the principles of fairness and statutory compliance. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the worker's subjective complaints without corroborating medical evidence, or to arbitrarily assign an impairment rating that deviates from the established guidelines without clear justification. This fails to adhere to the regulatory framework, which mandates the use of specific impairment rating systems and requires objective medical evidence to support findings. Another incorrect approach would be to interpret the impairment rating in isolation, without considering how it aligns with the legal definition of disability within the jurisdiction. This can lead to an inaccurate assessment of the worker's entitlement to benefits, potentially violating the worker's rights or misallocating employer resources. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes a systematic and evidence-based approach. This involves 1. Gathering all relevant medical documentation and understanding the worker's injury and treatment history. 2. Identifying and applying the specific impairment rating guidelines mandated by the jurisdiction, ensuring consistency and objectivity. 3. Carefully evaluating the medical evidence against the legal definitions of disability as defined by the jurisdiction statutes and relevant case law. 4. Documenting the entire process, including the rationale for the impairment rating and disability determination, to ensure transparency and defensibility. Question 6. During the evaluation of an employee's reported workplace injury, which of the following actions best demonstrates compliance with initial claim reporting and investigation requirements under workers' compensation regulations? Option A. Filing a claim report with speculative information about the cause of the injury, based on assumptions made by the reporting supervisor, to expedite the process. Option B. Waiting to file the formal claim report until a full investigation is completed, including obtaining all medical records and witness statements, to ensure the report is comprehensive. Option C. Submitting a claim report that includes only the information provided by the injured employee, without any independent verification or documentation from supervisors or the incident scene. Option D. Immediately filing a formal claim report with the Workers' Compensation Board based on the initial verbal report from the injured employee, while noting that further details will be provided as they become available. Correct answer is D. Immediately filing a formal claim report with the Workers' Compensation Board based on the initial verbal report from the injured employee, while noting that further details will be provided as they become available. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because the initial reporting of a workplace injury is a critical juncture in the workers' compensation process. Delays or inaccuracies in reporting can prejudice the investigation, potentially leading to incorrect benefit determinations, disputes, and regulatory noncompliance. The technical certification requires a thorough understanding of the specific reporting timelines and investigative protocols mandated by the relevant jurisdiction's workers' compensation laws. The correct approach involves promptly gathering all available information, documenting the incident thoroughly, and initiating the formal reporting process within the statutory deadlines. This aligns with the fundamental principles of workers' compensation, which aim to provide timely and appropriate benefits to injured workers while ensuring fair claims administration. Specifically, regulations typically mandate reporting within a defined period e.g., 24 hours, 3 days, to allow for a timely investigation, which may include interviewing the injured worker, supervisors, and witnesses, and reviewing medical records. This proactive stance ensures that all relevant evidence is preserved and that the employer fulfills their legal obligations. An incorrect approach of delaying the report until further information is gathered fails to meet the statutory reporting deadlines. This can be interpreted as a failure to comply with the law and can hinder the investigation by allowing evidence to degrade or become unavailable. It also demonstrates a lack of diligence in managing the claim. Another incorrect approach of filing a report with incomplete or speculative information, without clearly indicating the missing details, can lead to premature conclusions and misdirection of the investigation. While initial reports may be based on preliminary information, they should be accurate to the best of the reporter's knowledge and updated as more facts become available. A third incorrect approach of relying solely on the injured worker's account without independent verification or documentation risks overlooking crucial details or potential contributing factors, which is essential for a comprehensive investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to statutory reporting timelines, thorough and objective fact-gathering, and clear documentation. This involves understanding the specific reporting requirements of the jurisdiction, establishing internal procedures for prompt incident reporting, and conducting a preliminary investigation to gather essential details without undue delay. The focus should always be on fulfilling legal obligations and ensuring a fair and efficient claims process. Question 7. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a policy to automatically deny all requests for specialist consultation that exceed a predetermined dollar threshold without individual claim review could significantly reduce claim management expenses in the short term. However, this approach may also lead to delayed diagnoses and suboptimal treatment outcomes for injured workers. Considering the regulatory framework for workers' compensation, which of the following claims management strategies best balances cost-effectiveness with legal and ethical obligations? Option A. Conduct a thorough review of each claim requesting specialist consultation, assessing the medical necessity based on objective evidence and established treatment guidelines, and approving consultations when warranted, while also exploring cost-effective specialist options. Option B. Prioritize returning injured workers to modified duty as quickly as possible, even if it means limiting access to further medical evaluations, to reduce overall claim duration and associated costs. Option C. Implement a strict policy to deny all specialist consultations exceeding a fixed dollar amount to control immediate expenditure, regardless of the individual claim's circumstances. Option D. Focus on negotiating the lowest possible rates with all medical providers, including specialists, to minimize direct treatment costs, even if it means compromising on the quality or availability of care. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough review of each claim requesting specialist consultation, assessing the medical necessity based on objective evidence and established treatment guidelines, and approving consultations when warranted, while also exploring cost-effective specialist options. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims manager to balance the immediate financial implications of a claim with the long-term impact on injured workers' well-being and the employer's future costs. The pressure to reduce claim expenses can lead to decisions that, while seemingly cost-effective in the short term, may violate regulatory obligations and ethical duties. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with workers' compensation laws, which prioritize timely and appropriate medical care and benefits for injured employees, while also managing the financial health of the workers' compensation system. Correct approach involves a comprehensive review of the claim, focusing on the injured worker's medical needs and return-to-work potential, supported by objective medical evidence and adherence to established treatment guidelines. This approach aligns with the core principles of workers' compensation, which are to provide prompt medical treatment and wage replacement benefits to injured workers. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing workers' compensation in the U.S., mandate that claims be managed in a way that ensures injured employees receive necessary care and benefits without undue delay or denial. Ethical considerations also demand that claims managers act in the best interest of the injured worker, within the bounds of the law. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate cost reduction by delaying or denying necessary medical treatment without sufficient medical justification fails to meet regulatory requirements. Such actions can lead to penalties, increased litigation, and a breakdown of trust between employers, insurers, and employees. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on the most inexpensive treatment options, regardless of their efficacy or the worker's specific needs, disregards the regulatory mandate to provide appropriate and necessary medical care. This can result in prolonged recovery, permanent disability, and higher long-term costs for all parties involved. A third incorrect approach that involves pressuring the injured worker to return to work prematurely before they are medically cleared not only violates ethical obligations, but also contravenes regulations designed to protect workers from re-injury and ensure their recovery. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the claim's medical and factual basis. This involves consulting with medical professionals, reviewing all available documentation, and understanding the specific provisions of the applicable workers' compensation statutes. When faced with cost-saving opportunities, professionals must always weigh them against their regulatory obligations and ethical duties to the injured worker. A systematic review process, including regular claim assessments and adherence to established protocols for medical management and return-to-work planning, is crucial for making sound, compliant, and ethical decisions. Question 8. Operational review demonstrates that a claims adjuster is processing a worker's compensation claim for an employee who has sustained a back injury at work. The employee has expressed concerns about their ability to return to their previous job duties and has mentioned needing time off for ongoing physical therapy. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with all relevant federal laws? Option A. Process the worker's compensation claim for medical benefits and wage replacement, and advise the employee that the FMLA does not apply to work-related injuries. Option B. Process the worker's compensation claim for medical benefits and wage replacement, and advise the employee on their rights regarding job protection under the FMLA if their absence exceeds a certain duration, while also assessing if the back condition might constitute a disability under the ADA, requiring reasonable accommodations upon return to work. Option C. Process the worker's compensation claim for medical benefits and wage replacement, and inform the employee that their job protection is solely determined by the worker's compensation statute. Option D. Process the worker's compensation claim for medical benefits and wage replacement, and focus only on the immediate medical treatment and lost wages, assuming the employer will handle any ADA or FMLA considerations separately. The correct answer is B. Process the worker's compensation claim for medical benefits and wage replacement, and advise the employee on their rights regarding job protection under the FMLA if their absence exceeds a certain duration, while also assessing if the back condition might constitute a disability under the ADA, requiring reasonable accommodations upon return to work. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a nuanced understanding of how workers' compensation laws interact with other federal employment protections, specifically the Americans with Disabilities Act (ADA) and the Family and Medical Leave Act (FMLA). A claims adjuster must not only process a workers' compensation claim, but also be aware of potential overlapping rights and responsibilities that could impact the injured worker's employment status and benefits. Failure to recognize these interdependencies can lead to legal challenges, employee dissatisfaction, and potential penalties for the employer. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review that considers the interplay between the worker's compensation claim and the employee's rights under the ADA and FMLA. This means assessing whether the injury or illness might qualify as a disability under the ADA, necessitating reasonable accommodations, and whether the employee's absence or need for leave qualifies for FMLA protection, ensuring job security. This approach aligns with best practices by proactively identifying potential conflicts or complementary benefits, ensuring compliance with all applicable federal laws, and promoting a fair and supportive process for the injured employee. It demonstrates a commitment to holistic case management that goes beyond the immediate workers' compensation benefits. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the workers' compensation benefits without considering the ADA would fail to address the employer's obligations regarding reasonable accommodations. This could lead to a violation of the ADA if the employee's condition is a disability, and they are denied necessary adjustments to perform their job duties, even if their workers' compensation claim is processed correctly. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes the FMLA without adequately assessing the workers' compensation claim would overlook the specific benefits and protections afforded by workers' compensation, such as medical treatment coverage and wage replacement for work-related injuries. This could leave the employee without the full scope of benefits they are entitled to under workers' compensation law. A third incorrect approach that assumes workers' compensation automatically supersedes or negates ADA or FMLA rights is also flawed. These laws often work in conjunction, and an injured worker may be entitled to protections and benefits under all three frameworks, depending on the specific circumstances of their injury and their employer's policies. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the claim within the broader context of federal employment law. This includes 1. Thoroughly investigating the nature of the injury or illness and its impact on the employee's ability to perform their job. 2. Consulting relevant legal and HR resources to understand the potential application of the ADA and FMLA. 3. Communicating with the employee to understand their needs and rights. 4. Coordinating with the employer to ensure all legal obligations are met. 5. Documenting all decisions and communications meticulously. Question 9. Comparative studies suggest that the implementation of new claims management software in workers' compensation systems can introduce significant compliance risks. Considering the absolute priority of jurisdiction requirements for a technical certification holder, which of the following implementation strategies best ensures adherence to the specific regulatory framework of the jurisdiction? Option A. Focus on integrating the system with existing IT infrastructure, deferring detailed regulatory compliance checks until after the system is fully operational and initial claims are processed. Option B. Rely on the software vendor's general compliance statements and implement the system with minimal internal review, assuming the vendor has addressed all jurisdictional nuances. Option C. Implement the system after a thorough, documented review of its functionalities against the precise statutory and regulatory requirements of the jurisdiction, with a focus on how it handles all mandated data points and procedural timelines. Option D. Prioritize rapid system deployment to realize operational efficiencies, conducting a post-implementation audit for any potential regulatory discrepancies. The correct answer is D. Prioritize rapid system deployment to realize operational efficiencies, conducting a post-implementation audit for any potential regulatory discrepancies. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a technical certification holder to navigate the complexities of implementing a new workers' compensation claims management system while ensuring strict adherence to the specific regulatory framework governing the jurisdiction. The challenge lies in balancing the operational efficiency gains promised by the new system with the absolute necessity of compliance, particularly concerning the absolute priority of jurisdiction requirements. Misinterpreting or overlooking these requirements can lead to significant legal penalties, financial repercussions, and a failure to uphold the rights of injured workers. The correct approach involves a thorough, proactive review of the new system's functionalities against the established workers' compensation laws and guidelines of the relevant jurisdiction. This means verifying that the system accurately captures and processes all legally mandated information, adheres to statutory reporting timelines, and correctly applies jurisdictional rules for claim eligibility, benefit calculations, and dispute resolution. Regulatory justification for this approach stems directly from the foundational principles of workers' compensation law, which prioritize worker protection and employer responsibility within clearly defined legal boundaries. Failure to ensure the system's compliance from the outset is a direct violation of the technical certification holder's duty to uphold regulatory standards. An incorrect approach would be to assume the new system is inherently compliant, or to prioritize its implementation speed over a detailed regulatory audit. This could manifest as proceeding with implementation without a comprehensive review of how the system handles specific jurisdictional requirements, such as unique definitions of injury, specific waiting periods for benefits, or particular notice requirements for employers and employees. Such an oversight represents a significant regulatory failure because it risks processing claims incorrectly, potentially denying benefits to eligible workers, or imposing liabilities on employers that are not legally supported. Ethically, it demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the integrity of the workers' compensation system. Another incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the vendor's assurances of compliance without independent verification. While vendors may have a general understanding of workers' compensation principles, they may not possess the granular, jurisdiction-specific knowledge required for absolute compliance. This approach fails to acknowledge the technical certification holder's ultimate responsibility for ensuring the system meets the precise legal mandates of the jurisdiction. The ethical failure here is a delegation of critical compliance responsibility without adequate oversight, potentially leading to systemic errors that harm stakeholders. A professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a phased implementation strategy that includes a dedicated compliance review phase. This phase should involve cross-referencing system features with specific sections of the relevant workers' compensation statutes, regulations, and administrative guidelines. Engaging legal counsel or compliance experts specializing in the jurisdiction's workers' compensation law during this review is also a prudent step. The technical certification holder must act as the primary gatekeeper, ensuring that the system's design and operation are not just functionally sound, but legally unimpeachable within the defined jurisdiction. Question 10. Operational review demonstrates that an employee has returned to work with specific medical restrictions following a compensable injury. The employer has several open positions that are not directly related to the employee's pre-injury role, and some of these positions could potentially be modified to accommodate the employee's current limitations. However, implementing these modifications would require some minor adjustments to workflow and potentially a small investment in adaptive equipment. The employer is hesitant to proceed due to the perceived inconvenience and cost. Which of the following represents the most appropriate course of action under typical state workers' compensation frameworks regarding light-duty assignments and accommodations? Option A. The employer should inform the employee that no suitable light-duty positions are available within the company due to the employee's specific restrictions and the nature of the available roles, without further exploration of modifications. Option B. The employer should decline to offer any light-duty assignment, stating that the employee must be able to perform their full pre-injury duties before returning to work, even if medical documentation supports a phased return with restrictions. Option C. The employer should offer the employee a light-duty assignment in one of the available positions that most closely aligns with their restrictions, even if it requires some modifications to the role or minor equipment adjustments, provided these are reasonable and do not pose an undue hardship. Option D. The employer should offer the employee a light-duty assignment that is only temporary and significantly below their skill level, regardless of whether it fully accommodates their medical restrictions, to minimize the employer's perceived risk. The correct answer is C. The employer should offer the employee a light-duty assignment in one of the available positions that most closely aligns with their restrictions, even if it requires some modifications to the role or minor equipment adjustments, provided these are reasonable and do not pose an undue hardship. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the employer's operational needs with the employee's right to reasonable accommodation under workers' compensation law, while also ensuring compliance with specific state regulations regarding light duty. Misinterpreting or misapplying these regulations can lead to legal disputes, penalties, and a breakdown in employee relations. The core challenge lies in determining what constitutes a reasonable light-duty assignment, and when an employer has fulfilled their obligation to accommodate. The correct approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the injured employee's work restrictions, the nature of available light-duty positions, and the employer's ability to modify existing roles or create new ones, all within the confines of the relevant state's workers' compensation statutes and any applicable disability discrimination laws. This approach prioritizes compliance with legal obligations to provide suitable work that aligns with medical restrictions, thereby facilitating the employee's return to work and recovery. It demonstrates a commitment to both the employee's well-being and the employer's legal responsibilities. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the employer's convenience or perceived inability to accommodate without a genuine, documented effort to explore options fails to meet the legal standard. This could involve prematurely deeming an employee unable to perform any light duty without exploring modifications or alternative roles. Another incorrect approach is to offer light duty that exceeds the employee's documented medical restrictions, which not only risks re-injury, but also violates the spirit and letter of workers' compensation provisions designed to protect injured workers. Furthermore, simply ignoring the request for accommodation or offering a position that is clearly unsuitable without justification would be a significant regulatory and ethical failure. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific medical restrictions provided by the treating physician. Next, they must consult the relevant state workers' compensation statutes and any related case law to understand the employer's obligations regarding light duty and reasonable accommodation. This involves identifying available light duty tasks or positions within the company and assessing whether they can be performed within the employee's restrictions. If direct placement is not feasible, professionals should explore reasonable modifications to existing job duties or the creation of temporary light duty roles. Documentation of all assessments, communications, and decisions is crucial. If an employee's restrictions are so severe that no suitable accommodation can be found, this determination must be well substantiated and communicated clearly, adhering to all legal notice requirements. Question 11. Investigation of an injured worker's request for specialized medical treatment outside their designated medical provider network, MPN, presents a complex implementation challenge. The worker's treating physician within the MPN has recommended a procedure that is not available from any specialist within the MPN service area. The employer's claims administrator is hesitant to authorize the out-of-network treatment due to cost concerns and a general policy of adhering strictly to MPN guidelines. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims administrator to ensure compliance with workers' compensation regulations and ethical obligations? Option A. Thoroughly review the worker's medical records and the specific MPN contract to determine if any regulatory exceptions permit out-of-network treatment, such as the unavailability of a required specialist within the MPN. Option B. Approve the out-of-network treatment request immediately without further investigation to avoid potential delays in care and disputes. Option C. Advise the injured worker to seek treatment from a general practitioner within the MPN, even if that provider cannot perform the specialized procedure. Option D. Automatically deny the out-of-network treatment request because the worker is enrolled in an MPN and all treatment must be rendered within the network. The correct answer is A. Thoroughly review the worker's medical records and the specific MPN contract to determine if any regulatory exceptions permit out-of-network treatment, such as the unavailability of a required specialist within the MPN. Explanation: This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between ensuring timely and appropriate medical care for injured workers and adhering to the specific requirements of a medical provider network, MPN, as mandated by workers' compensation regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing the employer's or insurer's desire to manage costs and ensure network compliance with the injured workers' right to receive necessary treatment from qualified providers. Navigating this requires a thorough understanding of the governing regulations, ethical considerations regarding patient care, and the operational intricacies of MPNs. The correct approach involves a systematic review of the injured worker's medical records and the specific MPN guidelines to determine if the requested out-of-network treatment is permissible under defined exceptions. This requires careful consideration of whether the treating physician within the MPN has referred the worker out of network, if there's a documented lack of available specialists within the MPN, or if the treatment is for a condition not covered by the MPN. Adhering to these established protocols ensures compliance with the regulatory framework, which prioritizes worker access to care while maintaining the integrity and cost-effectiveness of the MPN system. This approach upholds the ethical obligation to provide necessary medical treatment and respects the established legal framework governing workers' compensation claims and MPNs. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the out-of-network treatment solely based on it being outside the MPN without a thorough investigation. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory provisions that allow for exceptions, potentially violating the worker's right to necessary medical care and leading to regulatory penalties for noncompliance. Another incorrect approach would be to approve the out-of-network treatment without verifying if the conditions for an exception have been met. This could result in financial mismanagement, undermine the purpose of the MPN, and potentially lead to disputes and appeals, demonstrating a lack of due diligence and adherence to established procedures. A third incorrect approach would be to pressure the injured worker to seek treatment only within the MPN, even when medically indicated exceptions exist. This disregards the worker's well-being and the regulatory framework's intent to ensure appropriate care, potentially leading to ethical breaches and legal repercussions. Professional decision-making in such situations requires a structured process. First, thoroughly understand the specific workers' compensation laws and MPN regulations applicable to the jurisdiction. Second, meticulously review all relevant documentation, including medical reports, treatment requests, and MPN provider directories. Third, identify if any exceptions to the MPN requirement are applicable based on the gathered information. Fourth, consult with relevant parties, such as the claims adjuster or legal counsel, if the situation is complex or ambiguous. Finally, make a decision that is both compliant with regulations and ethically sound, prioritizing the injured worker's access to appropriate medical care. Question 12. Strategic planning requires a proactive approach to managing potential liabilities and ensuring compliance with regulatory mandates. When an employee sustains a work-related injury, what is the most critical initial step an employer must take regarding the first report of injury (FROI) to adhere to best practices and regulatory requirements? Option A. Prioritize the employer's internal documentation and risk assessment processes over the immediate submission of the FROI, especially if the injury appears minor. Option B. Submit an incomplete FROI, omitting any information that is not immediately verifiable, with the intention of amending it later if necessary. Option C. Submit the FROI to the State Workers' Compensation Board and insurer immediately upon gaining knowledge of the injury, ensuring all legally required information is included, even if some supplementary details are still being investigated. Option D. Delay the submission of the FROI until a comprehensive internal investigation into the cause and extent of the injury is fully completed to ensure all facts are accurate. The correct answer is C. Submit the FROI to the State Workers' Compensation Board and insurer immediately upon gaining knowledge of the injury, ensuring all legally required information is included, even if some supplementary details are still being investigated. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because the timely and accurate submission of a first report of injury, FROI, is a critical administrative and legal requirement in workers' compensation. Delays or inaccuracies can lead to significant penalties for the employer, disputes with the insurer, and most importantly, can negatively impact the injured worker's access to benefits and timely medical care. The FROI serves as the official notification to the relevant state agency and the workers' compensation insurer, initiating the claims process. Therefore, understanding and adhering to the specific regulatory requirements for its completion and submission is paramount. The correct approach involves immediate and accurate completion and submission of the FROI, adhering strictly to the state's specific reporting timelines and content requirements. This aligns with the fundamental principles of workers' compensation law, which prioritize prompt reporting to ensure injured workers receive necessary medical treatment and wage replacement benefits without undue delay. Regulatory frameworks, such as those mandated by state workers' compensation boards, typically outline strict deadlines for FROI submission, e.g., within 24 hours, 48 hours, or a specific number of days after knowledge of the injury. Failure to meet these deadlines can result in fines and penalties for the employer. Furthermore, accuracy in reporting is essential to prevent claim denials or disputes that could further delay benefits. An incorrect approach of delaying submission until all investigative details are fully confirmed is professionally unacceptable because it directly contravenes regulatory mandates for prompt reporting. While thorough investigation is important for claim adjudication, it should not supersede the initial reporting requirement. FROI is a notification, not a final adjudication of the claim. Another incorrect approach of submitting an incomplete FROI without clear indication of missing information is also problematic. While some fields may require further investigation, the initial report should be as complete as possible with any known information, and any unavoidable omissions should be clearly noted or addressed through subsequent amendments as per state guidelines. This can lead to administrative holds on the claim and potential penalties. Finally, an approach that prioritizes the employer's internal investigation over the regulatory reporting deadline, even if the injury seems minor, is a failure to recognize the legal obligation. All work-related injuries, regardless of perceived severity, must be reported within the stipulated timeframe to comply with the law and protect the worker's rights. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should begin with a thorough understanding of the specific state's workers' compensation statutes and administrative rules governing FROI submission. Upon knowledge of a work-related injury, the immediate priority is to gather the essential information required for the FROI and submit it within the legally mandated timeframe, even if some supplementary details are still pending. Any pending information should be pursued concurrently with the reporting process. If there is any ambiguity regarding reporting requirements or deadlines, professionals should consult the relevant state agency or legal counsel specializing in workers' compensation. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows that a claims adjuster is reviewing a case where an individual who works for a company that performs maintenance on vessels sustained an injury while performing tasks on a vessel that was docked at a pier. The adjuster must determine if the Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act, LHWCA, applies. Which of the following actions best reflects the appropriate jurisdictional determination process under the LHWCA? Option A. Applying the LHWCA solely because the claimant works for a maritime-related company and the injury occurred on a vessel. Option B. Denying LHWCA coverage based on the assumption that state workers' compensation laws are generally applicable to injuries occurring on docked vessels. Option C. Confirming the claimant was engaged in maritime employment and the injury occurred at a situs covered by the LHWCA, such as a pier or terminal. Option D. Relying on the employer's initial assertion that the claim falls under state workers' compensation jurisdiction without further investigation. The correct answer is C. Confirming the claimant was engaged in maritime employment and the injury occurred at a situs covered by the LHWCA, such as a pier or terminal. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because determining the applicability of the Longshore and Harbor Workers' Compensation Act, LHWCA, requires a nuanced understanding of maritime employment and situs/tau omicron upsilon rho of injury, which can be complex and subject to interpretation. A claims adjuster must carefully weigh the specific facts against the statutory definitions and case law to ensure proper jurisdiction and benefits are applied, avoiding both undercoverage and overcoverage. The correct approach involves a thorough investigation into the claimant's duties and the location where the injury occurred. Specifically, it requires confirming that the claimant was engaged in maritime employment and that the injury occurred at a situs covered by the LHWCA, such as a pier, wharf, dry dock, or terminal. This meticulous fact-finding and application of statutory criteria ensures compliance with the LHWCA, providing appropriate benefits to eligible injured maritime workers while adhering to federal law. An incorrect approach that fails to investigate the claimant's duties and the situs of injury risks misclassifying the claim. If the claimant was not engaged in maritime employment or the injury did not occur on a covered situs, applying the LHWCA would be a regulatory failure, potentially leading to improper benefit payments and a violation of the Act's jurisdictional boundaries. Conversely, if the claimant was engaged in maritime employment and the injury occurred on a covered situs, failing to apply the LHWCA would be a failure to provide mandated benefits, a significant ethical and regulatory breach. Another incorrect approach might be to rely solely on the employer's initial classification without independent verification, which bypasses the adjuster's professional responsibility to ensure jurisdictional accuracy. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes factual investigation, statutory interpretation, and adherence to established legal precedent. This involves gathering all relevant information, cross-referencing it with the LHWCA definitions of maritime employment and covered situs, and consulting legal counsel or subject matter experts when ambiguity arises. The goal is to make an informed, defensible decision based on the law, not assumptions or expediency. Question 14. The review process indicates that a new administrative proposal aims to simplify claim processing by consolidating certain benefit eligibility criteria, potentially overlooking the historical significance of specific legislative milestones in workers' compensation law. Which of the following actions best upholds the integrity of the workers' compensation system and demonstrates adherence to the regulatory framework for the workers' compensation technical certification? Option A. Implement the administrative proposal immediately to improve efficiency, assuming that any legislative changes are implicitly incorporated into current best practices. Option B. Propose an alternative administrative solution that prioritizes speed of processing over strict adherence to the foundational principles established by key legislative milestones. Option C. Advise the administrative team that the historical context of legislative milestones is irrelevant to modern claim processing and focus solely on current procedural guidelines. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the historical legislative milestones that establish the current benefit eligibility criteria and assess the proposal's compliance with the intent and letter of those laws before implementation. The correct answer is A. Implement the administrative proposal immediately to improve efficiency, assuming that any legislative changes are implicitly incorporated into current best practices. Explanation. The review process indicates a potential ethical dilemma arising from a conflict between a desire to streamline administrative processes and the fundamental principles of workers' compensation legislation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the certification holder to balance efficiency with legal and ethical obligations to injured workers and employers. The core of the challenge lies in interpreting and applying the historical evolution of workers' compensation laws, specifically the establishment of key milestones, to ensure compliance and uphold the integrity of the system. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could inadvertently undermine worker protections or employer responsibilities, as defined by the regulatory framework. The correct approach involves recognizing that while administrative efficiency is desirable, it must not come at the expense of adhering to the established legal framework and the spirit of workers' compensation legislation. This means understanding that legislative milestones, such as the introduction of no-fault provisions or the establishment of specific benefit structures, represent fundamental shifts in how claims are handled and benefits are awarded. Upholding these principles requires a thorough understanding of the historical context and the legal implications of each milestone. The ethical justification stems from the duty to act with integrity and competence, ensuring that all actions are in full compliance with the workers' compensation technical certifications governing regulations, and the underlying statutes. This approach prioritizes the legal rights and protections afforded to all parties involved in the workers' compensation system. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate administrative expediency over legal accuracy would fail to acknowledge the significance of legislative milestones. For instance, disregarding the historical establishment of specific benefit calculation methods, even if a new, less burdensome method appears administratively simpler, would be a regulatory failure. This is because it bypasses the legal mandates established through legislative evolution, potentially shortchanging injured workers or unfairly burdening employers. Ethically, this approach demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the professional standards expected of a certified technician. Another incorrect approach might involve selectively applying historical legislative principles without a comprehensive understanding of their current legal standing, leading to inconsistent or non-compliant claim processing. This demonstrates a superficial understanding of the topic and a disregard for the systematic development of workers' compensation law. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. First, clearly identify the specific legal and ethical obligations relevant to the situation. Second, thoroughly research and understand the historical development and current standing of the relevant workers' compensation legislation, paying close attention to key milestones and their implications. Third, evaluate any proposed administrative changes or interpretations against these established legal and ethical standards. Finally, consult with supervisors or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity or concern about compliance, ensuring that all decisions are well documented and defensible. Question 15. The control framework reveals that a workers' compensation claim has reached an impasse, with the injured worker and the employer's insurance carrier disagreeing on the extent of temporary total disability benefits. The claims adjuster, tasked with managing the claim, must determine the most appropriate next step in resolving this dispute, adhering strictly to the established regulatory framework for workers' compensation dispute resolution. Which of the following actions best aligns with the principles of effective and compliant dispute resolution? Option A. Facilitate a discussion between the parties to explore informal resolution options, such as mediation, before considering more formal administrative processes. Option B. Advise the injured worker to seek legal counsel and then await further instructions from the employer's insurance carrier. Option C. Inform both parties that the current benefit level will be maintained until a definitive medical opinion is obtained, regardless of the dispute. Option D. Immediately file a formal appeal with the state's Workers' Compensation Board to have a judge decide the benefits. The correct answer is D. Immediately file a formal appeal with the state's Workers' Compensation Board to have a judge decide the benefits. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a claims adjuster to navigate the complexities of workers' compensation dispute resolution while adhering strictly to the established regulatory framework. The adjuster must balance the need for efficient resolution with the legal rights and obligations of all parties involved, ensuring fairness and compliance. Careful judgment is required to select the most appropriate dispute resolution mechanism based on the specific circumstances of the dispute and the applicable state laws. The correct approach involves understanding the various dispute resolution pathways available under the relevant state's workers' compensation laws and guiding the parties towards the most suitable option. This might include informal negotiation, mediation, or formal administrative hearings, depending on the stage of the dispute and the willingness of the parties to compromise. The regulatory justification lies in promoting the efficient and equitable resolution of claims as mandated by workers' compensation statutes, which often prioritize less adversarial methods before escalating to formal litigation. Ethical considerations demand impartiality and a commitment to due process for all stakeholders. An incorrect approach would be to unilaterally impose a resolution without exploring the mandated dispute resolution processes. This fails to respect the rights of the injured worker and the employer/insurer to participate in the resolution process as defined by law. Another incorrect approach is to push for formal hearing immediately, bypassing opportunities for less costly and time-consuming informal resolutions like mediation, which can be mandated or encouraged by regulations to reduce caseloads and facilitate quicker settlements. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the tiered dispute resolution system and can lead to unnecessary delays and increased costs, violating the spirit and letter of the law. A further incorrect approach would be to provide legal advice to either party, as this exceeds the scope of a claims adjuster's role and constitutes the unauthorized practice of law, a significant ethical and regulatory violation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the dispute's nature and the applicable state's workers' compensation statutes governing dispute resolution. This involves identifying the current stage of the claim and the party's willingness to engage in resolution. The adjuster should then assess which dispute resolution mechanism aligns best with the legal requirements and the specific facts of the case, prioritizing informal methods where appropriate and legally permissible, before considering more formal avenues. Continuous adherence to regulatory guidelines and ethical principles of fairness and impartiality is paramount throughout the process. Question 16. Assessment of a claims adjuster's decision-making process when a utilization review report recommends denial of a proposed surgical procedure for a worker with a work-related back injury, but the treating physician strongly advocates for the procedure based on the worker's persistent pain and functional limitations. And the jurisdiction's workers' compensation laws require adherence to specific medical treatment guidelines and provide for a peer review process if initial review is unfavorable. Option A. Automatically deny the proposed surgery based on the negative utilization review report, as this is typically a cost-saving measure for the employer/insurer. Option B. Inform the worker that the proposed surgery is unlikely to be approved due to the utilization review recommendation, and advise them to seek alternative, less expensive treatments. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the worker's medical records, the UR report's findings, the treating physician's justification, and the applicable medical treatment guidelines to determine if the proposed surgery is medically necessary and appropriate, initiating a peer review if indicated by the regulations and the evidence. Option D. Approve the proposed surgery immediately upon receiving the treating physician's strong advocacy, prioritizing the physician's opinion over the utilization review findings and established guidelines. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of the worker's medical records, the UR report's findings, the treating physician's justification, and the applicable medical treatment guidelines to determine if the proposed surgery is medically necessary and appropriate, initiating a peer review if indicated by the regulations and the evidence. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a claims adjuster to balance the need for timely and appropriate medical care for an injured worker with the employer's/insurer's obligation to manage costs and ensure medical necessity. The adjuster must navigate the complexities of utilization review and peer review processes, adhering strictly to the regulatory framework governing workers' compensation in the relevant U.S. jurisdiction. Core tension lies in ensuring that medical treatment aligns with established guidelines and is supported by objective medical evidence, while also respecting the treating physician's judgment and the worker's recovery. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of the medical records and the UR/peer review reports. This means carefully examining the rationale provided by the reviewers, cross-referencing it with the worker's specific condition, treatment history, and applicable medical treatment guidelines, e.g., OJ, ACOIM, or state-specific guidelines. The adjuster must then make a determination based on whether the proposed treatment is medically necessary, appropriate, and consistent with the evidence presented, adhering to the procedural requirements for notification and appeal outlined in the jurisdiction's workers' compensation statutes and regulations. This approach upholds the principles of fair claims handling and compliance with established medical necessity standards. An incorrect approach would be to automatically approve or deny treatment solely based on the initial UR recommendation, without independent critical evaluation. Automatically approving treatment based on a UR report, even if it appears favorable, fails to fulfill the adjuster's duty to verify medical necessity and could lead to the approval of unnecessary or inappropriate care, increasing costs without commensurate benefit to the worker. Conversely, automatically denying treatment based on a UR report that flags a treatment as not medically necessary, without a comprehensive review of the worker's specific circumstances and the potential for a peer review to overturn the initial finding, is also a failure. This bypasses the established appeals process and may unjustly deprive the worker of necessary care, violating the spirit and letter of workers' compensation laws designed to provide for injured workers. Another incorrect approach would be to prioritize cost savings above all else, disregarding the medical evidence and the potential impact on the worker's recovery. This demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a failure to adhere to the regulatory mandate of providing appropriate medical benefits. Professionals should approach such situations by first understanding the specific regulatory requirements for UR and peer review in their jurisdiction. This includes knowing the timelines for review, the criteria for medical necessity, and the rights of the injured worker and the provider. The decision-making process should involve a systematic review of all submitted documentation, an objective assessment of the medical evidence against established guidelines, and a clear understanding of the procedural steps for notification and appeal. When in doubt, consulting with medical advisors or legal counsel specializing in workers' compensation is a prudent step to ensure compliance and ethical practice. Question 17. Upon reviewing a newly filed workers' compensation claim where the injured worker has provided initial medical documentation indicating a work-related injury and is unable to perform their usual duties, what is the most compliant course of action regarding the initiation of temporary total disability (TTD) benefits? Option A. Delay the commencement of temporary total disability (TTD) payments until a formal settlement agreement or a final adjudication of the claim has been reached by all parties. Option B. Initiate temporary total disability (TTD) payments promptly upon reasonable establishment of liability, even if further investigation into the full extent of disability or final benefit duration is ongoing. Option C. Withhold all temporary total disability (TTD) payments until a definitive medical opinion regarding the worker's maximum medical improvement (MMI) has been secured and reviewed. Option D. Commence temporary total disability (TTD) payments only after a thorough investigation into the worker's pre-injury wage history and all potential subrogation interests has been completed. The correct answer is B. Initiate temporary total disability (TTD) payments promptly upon reasonable establishment of liability, even if further investigation into the full extent of disability or final benefit duration is ongoing. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of the workers' compensation technical certification's regulatory framework regarding benefit payment timelines and the implications of delays. The core challenge lies in balancing the employer's obligation to provide timely benefits with the administrative realities of processing claims, while always prioritizing the injured worker's immediate financial needs as mandated by law. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without causing undue hardship to the claimant. The correct approach involves initiating temporary total disability (TTD) payments as soon as liability is reasonably established, even if the full extent of the injury or final benefit amount is not yet determined. This aligns with the regulatory requirement to provide benefits promptly to alleviate financial distress for the injured worker. The justification is rooted in the principle that workers' compensation is a no-fault system designed to provide swift relief. Delaying payments until all investigations are complete, without a valid legal basis for denial, constitutes a failure to meet this fundamental obligation. An incorrect approach would be to withhold all TTD payments until a definitive medical opinion on the worker's maximum medical improvement (MMI) is obtained. This is a regulatory failure because it prioritizes administrative completeness over the worker's immediate need for income replacement, which is the primary purpose of TTD benefits. Another incorrect approach is to only begin payments after a formal hearing or settlement agreement is reached, as this significantly extends the delay and disregards the statutory duty to pay benefits when liability is reasonably clear. This approach fails to acknowledge the interim nature of TTD payments and the employer's responsibility to provide ongoing support during the claim investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes the injured worker's well-being and statutory compliance. This involves proactively assessing the claim for initial compensability, initiating payments based on reasonable evidence of injury and disability, and continuing to manage the claim efficiently to reach a final resolution. When in doubt about the extent of benefits, it is always more compliant to err on the side of providing interim benefits rather than withholding them, provided there is no clear indication of non-compensability. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates that the historical development of workers' compensation legislation in the United States was a significant departure from prior legal doctrines. Which of the following best describes the primary impetus for the creation of these laws? Option A. To shift the primary responsibility for workplace safety entirely onto individual employees. Option B. To establish a no-fault system that provided a more predictable and efficient method for compensating injured workers, thereby reducing litigation and promoting industrial safety. Option C. To grant employers absolute immunity from all lawsuits related to workplace injuries, regardless of fault. Option D. To formalize the existing common law system of employer liability, making it easier for employers to defend against claims. The correct answer is B. To establish a no-fault system that provided a more predictable and efficient method for compensating injured workers, thereby reducing litigation and promoting industrial safety. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because understanding the historical evolution of workers' compensation laws is fundamental to interpreting their current application and purpose. A deep understanding of these origins is crucial for technical certification, as it informs the rationale behind the legal frameworks governing employer liability and employee benefits. Misinterpreting these origins can lead to incorrect assumptions about the scope, intent, and limitations of workers' compensation statutes. The correct approach involves recognizing that early workers' compensation laws emerged as a response to the perceived inadequacies of common law tort remedies for workplace injuries. These common law remedies were often difficult for injured workers to pursue due to defenses like contributory negligence, assumption of risk, and the fellow servant rule. The legislative intent behind the establishment of workers' compensation systems was to create a no-fault system that provided a more predictable and efficient mechanism for compensating injured workers and their dependents, while also providing employers with a degree of certainty regarding their liability. This approach aligns with the foundational principles of workers' compensation, emphasizing social welfare and industrial accident prevention. An incorrect approach would be to assume that workers' compensation laws were primarily designed to protect employers from all liability, irrespective of the injury's cause. This fails to acknowledge the historical context of worker exploitation and the need for a system that prioritized employee well-being. Another incorrect approach would be to view workers' compensation as a purely contractual agreement between employer and employee, ignoring the statutory mandate and the public policy objectives it serves. This overlooks the compulsory nature of these laws and their role in regulating the employer-employee relationship concerning workplace injuries. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the administrative costs of workers' compensation without considering its historical purpose of providing a safety net for injured workers would be incomplete and misdirected. Professionals should approach this topic by first identifying the specific jurisdiction's historical legislative intent behind its workers' compensation statutes. This involves researching the conditions that led to the enactment of these laws, the problems they were intended to solve, and the underlying social and economic philosophies that shaped them. Understanding this historical context allows for a more accurate interpretation of current statutes, regulations, and case law, ensuring compliance and effective application of workers' compensation principles. Question 19. Performance analysis shows a claims handler is consistently closing claims within a shorter than average time frame, but a review of a sample of these claims reveals that some injured workers have appealed the decisions, citing a lack of thorough investigation and perceived bias towards the employer's initial report. What is the most appropriate course of action for the claims handler to ensure fair and impartial claims handling? Option A. Focus on meeting the established processing time targets, as this indicates efficient service delivery, and address any appeals on a case-by-case basis as they arise. Option B. Immediately implement a more rigorous review process for all claims, ensuring all submitted evidence is thoroughly examined and documented, and that decisions are clearly communicated with supporting rationale, even if it increases the average claims processing time. Option C. Continue to process claims efficiently, focusing on the employer's initial report as the primary source of information, and only conduct further investigation if explicitly mandated by a formal appeal. Option D. Advise the employer to provide more detailed initial reports to expedite the claims process and reduce the need for subsequent investigations. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement a more rigorous review process for all claims, ensuring all submitted evidence is thoroughly examined and documented, and that decisions are clearly communicated with supporting rationale, even if it increases the average claims processing time. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for efficient claims processing with the fundamental obligation to handle claims fairly and impartially, as mandated by workers' compensation regulations. The claims handler must avoid any perception or reality of bias, ensuring that all parties receive equitable treatment throughout the claims lifecycle. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective review of all submitted evidence, including medical reports, witness statements, and employer documentation, without prejudging the outcome. This approach aligns with the regulatory framework's emphasis on due process and the right of injured workers to a fair hearing. Impartiality means actively seeking and considering all relevant information, even if it appears to contradict an initial assessment, and communicating decisions clearly and transparently, supported by evidence. This upholds the ethical duty of a claims handler to act in good faith and in the best interests of all parties involved within the legal parameters. An incorrect approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness would fail to meet regulatory requirements for a complete investigation. This could lead to premature denial of a legitimate claim or an inaccurate assessment of benefits, violating the worker's right to receive benefits to which they are entitled. Another incorrect approach that shows deference to the employer's initial report without independent verification risks creating a biased process. This undermines the principle of impartiality, as the claims handler must act as a neutral arbiter, not an advocate for one party. Furthermore, failing to provide clear, evidence-based reasons for a claims decision constitutes a failure in transparency and due process, leaving the injured worker without understanding or recourse. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific regulatory obligations for fair and impartial claims handling. This involves a commitment to objectivity, a systematic approach to evidence gathering and review, and clear, documented communication. When faced with conflicting information or pressure to expedite, professionals must pause, reevaluate against regulatory standards, and prioritize a fair and thorough process over speed. Question 20. Implementation of a robust workers' compensation claims management process requires the ability to identify and categorize various forms of fraud. If an employee intentionally misrepresents the circumstances surrounding their injury to ensure their claim is covered under workers' compensation, which type of fraud is most accurately represented? Option A. Falsification of employment status. Option B. Collusion with medical providers. Option C. Intentional misrepresentation of the cause of injury. Option D. Exaggeration of the extent of disability. The correct answer is C. Intentional misrepresentation of the cause of injury. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a nuanced understanding of various types of workers' compensation fraud and their potential impact on the system. The challenge lies in accurately identifying and categorizing fraudulent activities, which can range from subtle misrepresentations to outright deception. A thorough understanding of the regulatory framework governing workers' compensation in the relevant jurisdiction is paramount to distinguishing legitimate claims from fraudulent ones. The correct approach involves recognizing that misrepresenting the cause of an injury to secure workers' compensation benefits constitutes a specific type of fraud. This is because workers' compensation is designed to cover injuries that arise out of and in the course of employment. Fabricating or altering the circumstances of an injury to fit within these parameters is a direct violation of the principles of the workers' compensation system and the associated regulations. Such misrepresentation undermines the integrity of the system, potentially leading to increased costs for employers and a diversion of resources from legitimate claimants. An incorrect approach would be to overlook or downplay the significance of an employee intentionally misrepresenting the cause of their injury. This failure to recognize the fraudulent nature of the misrepresentation is a direct regulatory and ethical failure. It demonstrates a lack of diligence in upholding the integrity of the workers' compensation system and could lead to the approval of an illegitimate claim, thereby contributing to the financial strain on the system and potentially encouraging further fraudulent behavior. Another incorrect approach would be to classify the misrepresentation of the injury's cause as a minor administrative error. This is a critical failure because it fails to acknowledge the intent behind the misrepresentation. Workers' compensation fraud is characterized by intent to deceive. Treating a deliberate misrepresentation as a simple error ignores this crucial element and absolves the individual of responsibility for their fraudulent actions. This can lead to a breakdown in trust and a weakening of the enforcement mechanisms designed to protect the system. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation of the facts presented in a claim. This includes scrutinizing the reported cause of injury against available evidence and understanding the definitions and implications of various types of workers' compensation fraud as defined by the applicable regulations. Professionals must be trained to identify red flags and conduct thorough investigations when fraud is suspected. Adherence to established protocols for reporting and investigating suspected fraud is essential, ensuring that all claims are processed fairly and in accordance with legal and ethical standards.